Well, there's the figures as you can see it on your screen as it stands at the moment. Gauteng leading the number of confirmed cases at 207. Very important that some people have argued is we should also be seeing the results of people who have recovered from the virus, as we've just been reported earlier on, that the first patient was confirmed to have the virus on the 1st of March has now been declared negative. But let's quickly move on to this. President Cyril Ramaphosa will address the nation at around 7:30, less than half an hour from now, on government's plans to contain the spread of the virus. SABC News' political editor, Mzwandile Mbeje, is joining us now from the Union Buildings. Good evening and welcome to the full view again, Mzwandile. We are counting down the minutes to that announcement, and speculation is rife that the president could just announce a state of emergency that could mean measures being implemented of an entire lockdown. I don't know, from the various stakeholders that the president has been speaking with over the past few days, including late last night as well, have you heard anything from them at all as to what these measures would mean if indeed the president does announce a state of emergency?
Oh, well, Aldrin, what we are sure about is that the president will announce at least some sort of stringent measures to try and deal with this crisis that is gripping the country. And of course, from those stakeholders that the president has met, I think theirs really was to offer the support, to say they are behind the president in what he's trying to do, in trying to curb the spread of this virus. But of course, theirs could only be suggestions. And then after all those suggestions had been put together, the president then met the National Command Council, as you know, Aldrin. That's where they assessed what has been happening since he first announced on Sunday that there was going to be a state of national disaster. So have those measures made any impact whatsoever? And then that's what they were reviewing as well. But I mean, we know that when the president announced, at the time, it was only 51 cases. So now we are standing at 402 cases. So clearly those measures were not sufficient. So either way, whether is it a state of emergency or he will tighten, perhaps, I think he still has a room to maneuver within the state of national disaster. I think every South African is waiting for something, at least that would be a bit drastic from what happened, because as they sit and look and hear the numbers rising, as you've just narrated now, so it causes a great concern to them. So we expect that this address will be a bit different. I mean, when we wake up tomorrow, we'll be talking differently from what we are talking about today.
I wonder as well that when the president had that meeting with the religious groups, he mentioned how dissatisfied he was that people were not adhering to the measures as well as the restrictions that were implemented post the declaration of the national disaster. And I wonder whether they would have looked at what happened over the Sunday period with church services at all and used that as a measuring stick as well to determine whether South Africans are adhering to these measures and complying to these measures. And also, Mzwai, taking into consideration in the president's weekly letter where he speaks about the manner in which all South Africans have taken charge of not just their own health, but the health of those around them has been exemplary. Is it really exemplary if we are saying that we continue with the spread of the virus?
Oh, well, perhaps going back to his meeting with the religious groups, and it was interesting, I mean, to listen to them advise the president. They made it clear. In fact, they said, Mr. President, if you feel the measures that are in place now are not sufficient, announce the lockdown for 14 days. So I think the president will take all this, Aldrin, into account, because here are people, the key stakeholders are saying, we are ready and willing to assist you, Mr. President. One of the measures we think you should take is to shut down for 14 days. And then from there, then we can assess if there is an impact. Because I think what everyone doesn't want to see is to see a situation where we will start to implement tighter actions when it is too late. We are witnessing the catastrophe right now in Italy, and I don't think anyone would want to see that kind of situation. That's why I'm saying whether he announces a state of emergency, he still has room to maneuver within the act that governs the national disaster.
We've also seen a leaked report from the SANDF indicating that SANDF members are being told to return back to the various barracks. Number one, we see now Botswana as well has called back all their army members who are on leave or who have been suspended, I guess, as well, to tell them to return back. And I wonder whether, when it comes to South Africa's plans, if the SANDF is part of that particular plan, and also taking into consideration earlier on during the press briefing or the impromptu press briefing, Jackson Mthembu, the minister in the presidency, being asked whether the army is part of the plans that the president will be announcing later on this evening. What do we make from his announcement, or rather from his reaction to that question, that let's rather wait for the president to make that announcement?
In fact, the army itself, the defense, I mean on Twitter as well, they did issue their own statement to say, because already South Africans were asking, so all of a sudden we are seeing soldiers on our streets. What does that mean? Is it a foretaste of things to come? They issued a statement, Alton, saying, well, so we are out here to support whatever the government is doing. So that does really give you an indication, because once he announces these strict measures, so it would mean movement will be very restricted, and you need someone to enforce it. You've just said earlier that there was a bit of frustration that people were not really adhering to what the president had announced. So you would need someone who will help you enforce that. So if the movement is to be restricted, of course there will be some among us who would simply choose to ignore that message, endangering the lives of everyone. So in that way, people like the Defense Force can then come in and say, well, you know, this is the state the country is in right now, so we have got to respect the rules of the country. So I see the role of really the army in that context, where it's coming to make sure that whatever measures that will have been announced so are then enforced, because it's pointless to announce, let's say, stringent measures, but there's no one to enforce them. So it will then, it will really not mean anything. So that's why I think, in my view, you see the soldiers out in the streets.
Mzwandile Mbeje, thank you so much for your time. And just about 21 minutes, that address from the president is expected from the union buildings around the stringent measures, as Mzwandile Mbeje has indicated, that will be employed to ensure that we contain the spread of the virus. And so very important to this is what was mentioned during the WHO briefing as well, is the spreading of the virus amongst community members.